Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to figure out how to turn this area into a coffee bar for my wife. Stick around and I'll show you how we do it. So starting off at the miter saw, I'm going to rip these 2x4s down to size. What I'm going to do is take them all to the table saw and rip them into 2x2s. With the 2x2s, that's going to be about the thickness I want for this coffee bar. Once I cut all the 2x2s down the side, I'm going to cut a rabbet in all the shorter pieces to hold the shelf that's going to go on there. So a rabbet's made in two cuts. The first cut's going to define the depth, and the second one's going to define the width. Now when you do these cuts, you're going to want to make sure that the second cut, you have the off piece facing out, because if you have it facing in, it might shoot back at you. To make sure both sides are going to be even, I cut out some spacer blocks before I glued everything up. So I put glue on all my rails, and after I did that I clamped it all down. The reason I did that is just because when you use pocket hole screws, it tends to turn the wood a little bit and move everything around, so you want to make sure everything's secure before you drive in all the screws. Once I finished putting everything together, I sanded down the two sides up to 220 grit. I did this because it's a little bit easier to get in all the small spaces while it's unassembled. To attach the long supports, I use the same method: pocket hole screws and glue. Once I put everything together and put it on the ground, I didn't like how it was structurally, so what I did was drilled some holes, drive some screws in from the backside, and plugged them in with some dowels. This part of the coffee bar is going to be painted, so what I'm going to do is just cut down these dowels and sand them until they're flush. Back at the miter saw, I'm going to cut some 1x4s down to size. These are going to be the shelves for the coffee bar. To make sure the shelf will fit, I placed two of the 1x4s on the outside, then measured the middle. Once I got that measurement, I cut the third board down to size until it fit perfectly. Now that I have the perfect fit for the shelves, what I'm going to do is use pocket holes and wood glue to attach them all together. I'm going to add a couple clamps just to make sure everything stays aligned. Once the shelf was finished, I flipped it over and sanded it smooth up to 220 grit. And this is just to give you an idea of what the coffee bar is looking like with the shelves on it. Next, we're going to work on the top. For the top, we're going to use 2x8s. We're going to cut them down to size on the miter saw using a stop block. Once I have all the 2x8s cut down to size, I take them to my table saw so I can joint the edges. If you've never seen me do this before, I have another video I'll link at the top. It kind of goes into more detail of how I do this and why. Now, once I have everything jointed, I flip the board over and I cut it down to its final size. I'm going to attach the top using the same method as I used for the shelves. I'm going to use pocket hole screws and wood glue. To make sure this top was going to be as flat as possible, I put clamps on the top and all of the seams. Once I was happy with how everything was clamped, I grabbed some 2.5-inch pocket hole screws and I drove them all in. Once I finished the tabletop, what I did was flip it over and sanded it up to 180 grit. I'm going to do the final sanding once I attach it to the base. Now to get rid of those sharp edges, I'm going to use my router and put a round over on both sides of the top. After I put the round over on it, I hand sand the edges up to 220 just to make sure they're smooth. I fill in any gaps or openings with wood filler, and then I'm going to sand it down one final time up to 220. I want this coffee bar to have a two-tone look, so I'm going to end up painting the base 2 coats of this white paint, while I'm going to stain the tops and the shelves a different color. The stain I end up going with is a ebony color by Varathane. The way I like to apply stain is use a foam brush, flood the surface, let it sit for 3 to 5 minutes, and then get a couple clean rags and wipe it all off. And just a quick safety tip for everyone, if you're going to stain within an enclosed area, make sure you're wearing some kind of respirator just to protect yourself from the fumes. The finish I like to use is Minwax's polyacrylic. The way I apply the finish is I just get a paintbrush and I completely cover the surface. What I do on the 3rd coat is I do long strokes across the top just to make sure I'm going to get the whole surface to have an even look. I apply 3 coats and making sure I sand in between with 220 grit. Now to make sure these shelves are going to sit down flush with the top, I'm going to clamp it down so that way it's even with the surface. After I do that, I'm going to drive some screws from the bottom to keep it all in place. I make sure I have everything centered on the base by using my tape measure to measure both sides. Once I have everything centered, I grab some clamps so I can lock in the position, and then I'm going to drive some screws in from below. And if you guys are ever interested in the tools and material I use for this build, I always link them down below. Now that the coffee bar is complete, it's time to move this on top. And there you go, finished coffee bar for my wife. I think she's gonna love it. And if you guys like videos like these, please like and subscribe so you never miss a video.